I have no conflicts.
That's right. Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Panel, good afternoon. I'm speaking on behalf of the applicants and the landowners, and as you've said, against the staff's recommendation for refusal. I fully understand that the role of the panel in this case is to provide advice to council, and of course our hope is that your advice is that the planning proposal is fair and reasonable and will not result in development that's detrimental to Berrima. In brief, the council is not supportive because it believes the current planning regime to be appropriate. It's concerned about impacts to heritage values within Berrima, and it's concerned about environmental issues, specifically potential impacts from bushfire asset protection zones that are required for any future dwellings. Within the planning proposal submission, all of those above issues were well canvassed. It's acknowledged that the planning proposal in this case is not born out of a defined strategic planning issue. It's very much site-specific. This alone shouldn't preclude the planning proposal because there needs to be recognition from time to time that the LEP isn't infallible and that there should always be room for consideration of exceptional circumstances. In this case, the exceptional circumstances, in my view, arise through the inequity of the LEP that exists between land. Is essentially the same in its historical circumstances and in its capacity to accommodate reasonable development. When that occurs in the planning system, it should be addressed and reviewed. Therefore, the planning proposal submission raised the following questions as a means of testing my contention that the LEP is not fair and reasonable in its treatment of these landowners. I don't believe that these questions have been adequately answered in Council's report. Firstly, are the existing planning controls appropriate for the circumstances of the site? Well, I don't believe they are. They're far more restrictive than those that are enforced upon other adjoining land with the same history and characteristics. Secondly, are they required to achieve the right land use outcomes? No. The current controls restrict development to one dwelling, whereas the planning proposal would result in 3. This would be completely consistent with the prevailing development pattern surrounding the land. None of the surrounding land parcels observe the current 1 hectare minimum lot size. They're all smaller than this. The standard has never related to the development pattern of the locality and has no role to play other than to restrict one landowner. Thirdly, are appropriate outcomes achievable under a different set of rules? We say yes. The land can provide suitable building envelopes for 3 dwellings, consistent with the existing development pattern. The heritage and bushfire reports support the outcome of 3 dwellings, and Council has the opportunity to assess and approve the DAs for those dwellings to ensure appropriate scale and character of the built form. Fourthly, what distinguishes this land from other land that has different land use rules? Nothing. Nothing at all. Planning control shouldn't lead to radically different outcomes for land that is in exactly the same circumstances. These lots share a common heritage with adjoining land, and that should be recognised by allowing a common outcome to prevail. And lastly, will the proposed amendment to the local plan adversely impact upon or conflict with other strategic planning outcomes as expressed in state policies or local strategies? The answer is no. This planning proposal has no implications for strategic planning across the Shire, simply a recognition that a minor change to the existing controls is reasonable and can result in a positive outcome. If I may, thank you. So I'm asking the panel to specifically consider those questions as they advise the Council, because I believe in answering those questions, the conclusion of the Council should have been to support the planning proposal. The existing planning controls are completely inconsistent in their application across this part of Berrima, and the planning proposal asks for no more than has been allowed on all the other land in this location. Yes, Berrima is heritage sensitive, but in relation to heritage, I don't think Council is sure of exactly what it wants to protect. The subject land is made up of original lots within the Hoddle plan, yet Council doesn't want to allow the use of those lots in a pattern that would be consistent with the Hoddle plan. The current planning controls are inconsistent with the Hoddle plan. To both the east and west of the site, there are houses built on original Hoddle lots, so why are the subject lots not suitable for housing in the same way? Council raises concerns about vegetation removal associated with the bushfire asset protection zones, but that report indicates the appropriate building envelopes consistent with other housing envelopes, and the APZs and the 50-metre vegetation protection along the river frontage we believe is appropriate. Visual impact from new housing when viewed from the Berrima town centre will range from negligible to non-existent. Thank you, that's fine.
Questions?
Thank you, Stephen. It struck me that we don't really know what sort of trees or the number of trees that will be needed to be removed for the APZs. I understand there's reference that tree coverage will still be provided, and an important aspect, as I understand it, is the view back to the site from Berrima Marketplace. Did you think about providing a little bit more detail in terms of, you know, what practically to the DA stage really to justify it?
Oh, we considered what level we should go to. My reading of the bushfire report is that it provides the envelope, like I say, consistent with the building alignment of dwellings to both the east and the west. It identifies what would be the asset protection zone, and in that area you would expect to see some thinning or clearing of some of the vegetation, although there's not a lot in that. If you've been there, you would have noticed that the area for the dwelling is pretty much cleared grassed area. It's the waterfront or the river frontage area that is more heavily vegetated and provides the screen from viewing directly from town back to the site. And the bushfire report provides a 50 metres vegetation zone. So that's outside, that 50 metres is outside of the asset protection zone and then the envelope. So based on that, we didn't believe it was necessary to provide too much more detail. If the bushfire report had been different and had indicated a higher level of clearing or a smaller vegetated zone along the riverfront, yes, it might have been more pertinent or more necessary to provide that, but we didn't think it was.
No, I don't.
Yeah, is there any attempt to run some cost collections through the site and the relationship to the existing Berrima village itself across the river? Because when you're on site the land slopes quite steeply the mowing part, so far, or equivalent of what would be the mowing part. But then it drops away very, very quickly. And if you reduce the APZ area, you still have to make sure that there is some form of linear protection for the creek zone, or the river zone. And when you drop the sections, the chances are that this site will become highly visible from the village itself, which is an issue of concern. And you can't really tell that from looking at the plans as a linear form, but you could, if you're cutting cross sections through. But my question is, was there any attempt to run a more detailed analysis?
Short answer, no, we didn't do that. And it's, I suppose, that balance between what part of the process we're in now is distinct from what is development assessment issues. That would have, I mean, the alternative would have been if the council was more, or thought that they could be supportive of the general principle but needed to be convinced of an outcome, we could have provided that. But the recommendation doesn't allow us to do that, because if council has reached a conclusion they just don't like it. Now, we would not be hostile to a request for further information that goes to those issues, but there's no point in that if the council fundamentally doesn't want to change the LEP, which is what they've said in this report. That's the essence of my submission to the panel, is the advice to council could be, you know what, it's not, you know, if you could be convinced of X, Y and Z, this is not a bad idea. But the recommendation of the staff is simply not to support it at all. So that information then, we didn't think it was necessary in the first instance. We thought that the emphasis should be on the principle of whether or not it could be changed for the reasons I've set out. I think it should be or could be. But we would certainly welcome the opportunity to provide additional information to convince council that the end product is suitable.
Mr. Lee, have you got the report there in front of you?
Excuse me. No, I don't. Not in front of me.
Okay, so in the have you got your bushfire assessment report?
I've got none of that in front of me at the moment. If I
I'll
had a
take
screen,
your
I could call it up.
Let's take your point about existing development in the area on existing lots on the HODL lots.
Yes.
However, the houses constructed on those lots were prior to the current bushfire, the RFS bushfire, Planning for Bushfire Assessment Guidelines. And on page 18 of your assessment on that report, it's got the APZs, which basically run along the frontage of the site and 45 metres behind a building envelope that's nominated, which is basically within that cleared area, which we all see.
Correct, yeah.
So, which, you know, that would result in, would it not, a substantial amount of clearing within that particular area of the site, which would then be within that conservation area, within the heritage conservation area. So would you not agree that it would therefore not, the end product would not be consistent with what is existing development there on adjoining land? Given that they were, all that housing was built prior to the current Planning for Bushfire Guide, which require all those APZs and... The
housing you're referring to is immediately to the east?
Well,
all the way. There's development, just I suppose, there are two dwellings particularly that I'm referring to directly to the west, which are on similar lots to what we're talking about here. And there are a number of lots, I think 5 dwellings, maybe it's 6, immediately to the east, which are also on some of these original allotments. Then further to the east, there is another newer subdivision and development of, I think it's 9 houses, which have all been developed more recently, and that area there has had some significant clearing impacts. I don't think that the arrangement that we're talking about here, given the area that a house would be built, in which we'd suggest that would be built, it requires much clearing at all. The envelopes, the entirety of the building envelope would be in cleared land. The area then to the north of the envelope towards the river, the asset protection zone would require some clearing, but not clear felling. As an asset protection zone, it doesn't need to be clear felled. And then you have a 50-metre area of riverfront vegetation that would be untouched. So I don't think it's correct to say there would be significant land clearing or tree clearing as a result of our proposal.
Just 36 metres.
Well, the envelope, my view is that the envelope, the building envelope, is within completely cleared land. There might be some removal of a tree or some vegetation on the roadside as well, for access, probably more than bushfire assessment purposes. To the north of the building envelope, some clearing and thinning out, but the retention of more significant trees. It's more the understory in the interconnecting canopy to avoid that. And then you have 50 metres of riverside vegetation that would not be impacted. And I think that's a pretty significant 50 metres, and with the retention of that, I don't see that there would be significant visual impact from the town.
Is there other land like this within Berrimah, within the Heritage Conservation area, where this same principle could apply to other land that you're?
No, not that I'm aware of. I mean,
Are you going to be coming back with other applications to do a similar thing on other sites?
I wouldn't. Well, I can never say never, but I don't think so. I'm trying to think now where this sort of situation is repeated. You have the village area, which is generally the residential zones, and by and large they have been developed. Yeah. There's not really any areas there I can think of that have subdivision potential within the zoned areas, or the residential zoned areas of the village. You've got the surrounding landscape conservation areas and the rural areas. Generally speaking, they're within the C3 environmental management zones and the 40 hectare zones, where those provisions are more relevant because they are much larger lots and they are the rural surrounding areas. This particular little patch as you come in from Mossvale is a little bit of that. Is it this or is it that? Our contention is that it is more of a residential portion of the village, and that's evident by the existing pattern of development and the surrounding houses. And this is for whatever reason, a leftover. The owners of this property are long-time Berrimah residents, grew up across the river, looking back at this site. It's their land. They know the village. It's their part of the world. They just never developed or built like everybody else did. And now they're caught in a situation where the council has planning controls that are designed to restrict development rather than facilitate it. Fundamentally, that's the issue I see. The planning controls of council are designed to stop something happening that has happened all around, rather than allowing something that is reasonable. And that's my request in the planning proposal. Council, please reconsider that, because I think that that's unfair. It's not how the planning system should operate. And if you allowed that change, the sky won't fall in. You'll have 3 houses there that will be completely consistent in the pattern of development with everything else around them. I don't think that that's an adverse outcome.
And those DAs would have to go, because they're in a heritage conservation area.
They're coming here for council.
Thanks, Mr. Lee.
Thank you very much.
Now, I just want to make sure I get everyone here today that's speaking. So I've only got 2 other speakers, and we're going to be graced with Mr. Lee speaking to us again on 2 other occasions, with 2 other matters. So Mr. Andy Carnahan, are you here? Just before you come up, and Mr. Richard Anderson is here as well. Excellent. Rightio, Andy, or Mr. Carnahan, you're up next, talking on the DA for the seniors housing development at Old Jello Road. Now, we've been out to that site. We notice that there's an existing development occurring on the site. This panel is interested not necessarily in that development application. We're interested in the development application that's before us, with the seniors housing proposed to go along the street frontage there in that back L-shaped corner next to the nursing home. So that's what we're dealing with at the moment. So yes, you've got 3 minutes, and if you need a bit more time, I'll be generous.
Thanks very much. Thank you for the opportunity to address the panel. My name's Andy Carnahan. I'm a resident of Bundanoon. I'm also the president of the Community Association. We have over 400 members and believe we reasonably represent the aspirations of the village. My address is on behalf of the association is to support council's recommendation to reject the second stage of the development. Important from the outset to say that the association supports development that retains and maintains the character of Bundanoon. We also recognise that over 55s living is a needed housing stock in Bundanoon. And finally, unusually perhaps to acknowledge that developers are responsible for most of our domestic built environment, and without them we wouldn't have roofs over our heads. To begin with, I will speak through the lens of the current development through the single tree that remains on the site. It's locally dubbed the Hope Tree after community action helped to amend the original DA to preserve this significant tree. There are no other trees, as you probably noticed, remaining on the site. During this course of this development, we've watched and reported to council as the developer or their contractors have treated this tree with disrespect. The first page of the attachment, I think you've got, shows the tree in its original state, and then subsequent images show the lack of the tree protection zone that was required, and particularly you notice that the root and grip zones have been severely impacted by heavy vehicle traffic and excavation through that. We've reported the breaches to council and the appropriate protection zones or fencing's been applied. The tree has received a trim from an arborist, yet even today one side of the fencing is open wide enough to allow vehicles to go in. So what does a tree have to do with the second DA in our submission? Well, for the community, it's that the visible infers the invisible. If we can see in plain sight a clear breach of a condition of consent, we assume, rightly or wrongly, that this is the behaviour of the proponent for all other aspects of the DA. Secondly, stage 2 of the development should at least raise eyebrows. The last image I've provided, that I assume you've got, if you've been out recently, you'll see this is 2 large billboards on the development site showing that particular image. It's also the advertising material on the local real estate's website. What you don't need to look too closely at is to realise that the open space in front of these billboard images and this image is in fact where the proponent is intending to put 6 units.
Another minute?
Yes, absolutely, that's all I need. So all of that green space frontage that looks so attractive in the billboards and advertising material is in fact going to have 6 units placed across the front of it with a pocket-sized open space left. It will diminish the streetscape of the development, and for anyone who's bought off the plan, it's going to replace that open space vista in front of them with, I guess, the view of the backyard of the unit in front. Our community has been traumatised by the clear felling of the trees. Some we believe were marked for retention. We're also greatly inconvenienced, as we would have noticed, by the extended closure of Old Wingellow Road. We'd suggest to the panel that the existing stage 1 should be completed before any other application is considered. So based on community concern from the observed behaviour of the proponent to comply with the existing DA and the impact of the streetscape of the second DA, the association supports council's advice to the panel to refuse the second stage DA.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. Questions?
Yes, you spoke about the original approval, and I was trying to understand myself the green space as you spoke about. Were you involved, or did your group raise objections about the first development?
Yes, one of the principal objections, well, one of the more negotiations was the retention of the tree. The large specimen tree, we believe that through the community association and community members' actions, that large tree was not removed. The arborist report at the time didn't recommend removal, and the proponent at the time did adjust the development to make space or to leave that tree there. Certainly the front space, the association would be, to retain a streetscape, was certainly in favour of. Some of the trees that went, we were concerned they weren't part of the approved trees, but I can't speak to that.
Thank you.
So just asking, in respect of this image of the, the bird's eye view of the proposal, which is, I think you say from the billboard, you haven't seen this sort of plan anywhere else apart from that billboard?
Oh, when the original DA went in, certainly. This is based on the approved DA, the first one.
Yeah.
But now there's a second DA that in fact imposes a footprint of 6 more dwellings on top of that.
So you say you saw an image similar to this in the original application for the 28 lots?
Oh, look, what I can say is I saw the straight overhead plan of
Yes.
the first one of whatever it was, 2011-44, and it shows, it shows quite clearly, it quite clearly shows the large green space in front.
Yeah, open space along Wingellow.
Along Old Wingellow Road, yes, yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yep. I guess the panel's been struggling with this one as well because there's a bit of potential confusion between the existing development approval and the proposed DA, because it's not only the 6 dwellings that you mention along Old Wingellow Road, but it's also another sector, a total of another 22 dwellings, including the 6 that will be located in the western sector of the development as well, and which will impact on vegetation which still exists within the site. I guess the clarity that the panel is struggling with is that there is an approved DA and there have been some subsequent consents to remove existing trees, partly within the area that we are focusing on along Old Wingellow Road, but there's also coming to grips with the changes to the approval in terms of the modified consent. And as the chairperson pointed out, our task is primarily to focus on the DA before us, but taking into account your comments about the performance perhaps of the development in terms of the existing development. So we're struggling with getting those pieces together, and we appreciate the subtlety that you've delivered back to us to think about. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, just if you could help me in terms of if you were to live on this site, Mr. Cunningham, how you might access services. If you were a senior citizen living on this site, how would you access services?
Well, looking at the particular plan, you wouldn't have a footpath to walk along, and there's no connected footpath up to the village. I believe there's a once or twice a day bus route for school buses. So for me, one of the challenges of these developments is encouraging pedestrian mobility as much as possible, and it would be, and we suggested to the original proponent, footpaths from the development up through to the village, because I think pedestrian walking paths are becoming a really important part of community living for people who age in place.
How do you, there's a bus route, I know the report itself says, and I guess that's an important thing, just was clarified, the staff have advised us, in their report they say the site is equipped with 400 bus route, but actually confirmed it is with 400 bus route. How would you get onto a bus if you were choosing to transport your way that way into town from this site? Is there any, we couldn't see any bus stops near the site? Is it a hail down bus? Or
To be honest, I believe they're pretty much a couple of school buses that may pick up people. I don't know if there's actual the Berra bus lines routes through there. I don't think you'd go from this development into town on a bus. You'd either walk, ride a bike, have a mobility scooter, or probably in 90% of the cases, you'd drive a car. Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Chair and panel. I'm speaking on behalf of the applicants and landowners against the staff's recommendation. And as you know, I've got Richard here from Civil Development Solutions. Richard's provided all the civil engineering input and is involved in the construction of the Stage 1 development. I've been involved in the development for some time, having prepared the statement for this DA and the preceding Stage 1 DA, which we had significant discussions with Council prior to the lodgement of that DA. And those discussions including the master plan for the site, Stage 1 and 2, the suitability of the site for location for seniors housing and how the provision of such housing within Bundanoon would be an ideal planning outcome. That was approved, Stage 1 DA, for seniors housing. We're disappointed therefore at the recommendation for refusal of this application. The reasons for refusal cover a lot of ground and I'm not going to try and rebut every single issue raised. However, I'd like to point out 3 particular issues of note from the applicant's perspective. We are concerned at the claims that the site is not suitable as a location for seniors housing, particularly when Council has already emphatically endorsed the site as suitable through its approval of the Stage 1 DA. That's a threshold question and one that we would ask the panel to be very clear about in any determination that you reach. From our perspective, it's simply an untenable position for an applicant to receive an approval on a site for a seniors housing, then have the same consent authority under the same planning controls, then say that the site is not suitable. Secondly, there is a heavy reliance within the reasons for refusal on the provisions of the Housing SEP 2021, which we say is not relevant. The Housing SEP is heavily referenced throughout the assessment, but the DA was lodged at least 3 months before the Housing SEP came into force. It's not the relevant planning instrument. Just like Stage 1, the development draws its permissibility under the provisions of the local environmental plan. Finally, the claims that tree removal in Stage 1 has not been authorised are not true. Richard may be able to answer questions you may have in relation to that. However, if there has been any unauthorised felling of trees, that is rightfully a compliance and enforcement matter, not a matter for the assessment of this stage DA or this DA. In relation to the layout for this stage, Council did raise a concern about 2 particular native trees, and we met with Council some months ago, discussed all of this, and as a result, amended plans were prepared that realigned the dwellings and driveways to ensure retention of those trees. The arborist report was submitted at that time as well. In summary, the grounds for refusal appear to be based on perhaps a spurious claim of unauthorised tree removal, not associated with this DA. The use of a planning instrument is not relevant to the DA, and a complete about-face on the threshold question of the suitability of the site for seniors housing. Therefore, we're requesting that the panel reach a positive conclusion, as was reached by Council for Stage 1 DA, and approve the development for the following reasons. It's a suitable site for seniors housing. It will provide much needed housing diversity within Bundanoon that is an outcome aligned with its adopted housing strategy, and one that is responsive to the needs of the Bundanoon community, and therefore the development is of significant social benefit. It's completely consistent with the housing character already approved under DA 20/1144, Stage 1, and it is permissible under Council's own local plan, and it's compliant with all the relevant controls. Richard and I are happy to try and answer any questions you may have.
Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Lee. Did the original DA, did that go to a council meeting? Do you know how it got approved? I know it was approved in December. A deferred commencement consent was issued.
Testing my memory there, I don't have any recollection of having to front up to a council meeting to advocate on behalf of that. I was involved in it. I think it may have been delegated authority approved it.
Okay. And I understand it was a deferred commencement consent. Do you know when it was made operational?
That was written in the report, I think, but it was when the subdivision was registered on which the site was located.
But your understanding is that it has been made operational?
Correct, yes.
The council have acknowledged that in the report.
Just to clarify, Mr. Lee, we've come to the same conclusions regarding the housing SEP.
Okay.
That it's dealt with under the housing SEP's not relevant because it was lodged prior to the
Yes.
commencement of it.
Yes, it was.
And the LEP provisions therefore apply in DCP.
Okay, thank you.
We're in agreement with that, so I'll just confirm.
Okay.
Yes, I do, Chair. I do have a couple of questions. Two matters touched on already. One, the business about the open space shown in the original proposal. We're talking about the stage 1 proposal. I'd like you to address that matter. And secondly, what is your understanding about mobility access arrangements back to town? I'm not thinking about the bus, but what other accessibility would there be for a disabled person, possibly walking or by, by a small vehicle?
I can answer that second part of the question first.
Right, yeah.
The mobility. They're associated with the first stage is some footpath upgrades back to the intersection of Old Winslow Road and Hill Street. And the bus service, which I think is Route 308, is really an inter-town service between Bundanoon and Mossvale. So for people wishing to go from here to Mossvale for the broader range of services would have the opportunity to take that service. I think as Andy said before, it would be most likely that people wanting to visit this, the town centre, Bundanoon shops from this site, are most likely to either walk or drive. The majority of residents within independent living are independent, so they are not completely reliant upon those sorts of services, although having them available is important. There is no intention at the moment, although you wouldn't ever rule it out, there is no intention at the moment to provide a on-site or a bus service or a mini bus service as you see in some other larger seniors housing developments. Like I said, I wouldn't rule that out, but it's not part of the proposal.
Yes, and can I just ask, in relation to getting back to, say, Hill Street, is part of the proposal, can you go directly to from the site to Hill Street without going to Old Winslow Road?
No, you would go through, depending which dwelling is yours, you'd travel through the site to the footpath on Old Winslow Road and thence to Hill Street.
So you must go back onto Old Winslow. You can't go through an edge of the Warrigal site, for example.
No. There's a footpath being constructed from the site through to Hill Road.
Right.
And with pram ramps on both sides of Hill Road.
Yes. But my main point is you've got to go down the hill. You've got to go down to Old Winslow Road and then go around the corner into Hill.
Site, no.
And then, sorry, to you, Scott, the issue about the open space. The open space shown in the sketch.
Oh, okay. I'm not sure the sketch. Richard might answer this more fully, but the work that's been undertaken now on Old Winslow Road is all in accordance with the council approval for under a construction certificate and Section 68 approvals and Road Act approvals. So all infrastructure related matters, and that's the work that's being done. You want to complete that?
Well, originally there was vegetation along Old Winslow Road. I think the questions you're saying about the open space shown in stage 1 now becoming units, is that what you...
That's right.
Yeah.
This is certainly, you're given the impression, if you're going to buy one in stage 1, you're given the impression there's all this lovely open space along Old Winslow Road, which is now to have six villas.
Correct. We're dealing with the development application. I suppose I don't wish to comment on marketing material, if I can call it that. But certainly it's clear in the development application before the panel as to where development is proposed. And that is partly occupies areas that under the original approval was some open space, yes.
It's not, it's just shown as undeveloped land, I think, on the original.
Yeah, sorry, open space, not in the formal sense. Green.
I guess that's probably better. So what you're saying, what was the commitment for that area along Old Jello Road in terms of the original development application?
Well, under the stage 1, if we call it that, or the first one, there was a green space along Old Winslow Road.
There's a landscape buffer along.
Yep, landscaped area, if you like. I suppose under this DA, some of that area is being developed.
Well, the proposed landscape buffer is still.
Well, what does that say about the original application then, if it's shown as being private open space and now in stage 2 it's got houses on it? That seems to be quite inconsistent and perhaps giving a wrong impression of what the final development of stage 1 would have been.
Yes, just ask questions.
I'm sorry, yes.
I guess my question following from that is, why do you say it's appropriate to, if the original application was approved possibly on the basis that, you know, the consent authority thought there was a good landscape buffer along Jello Road, the houses were well set back, what do you see the justification is for now for removing the landscape buffer that was part of the original development?
I think a lot of that area there.
Yeah, I guess that's the question. What was presented originally as a landscape buffer? Was that whole?
No, there was only a section at the front.
Where that park is, which is
Well, there was
essentially
the park was submitted as a communal recreation area, and then
this area here. Is that what you're referring to?
no, there was a section in the stage 1 DA that was not that whole area that was set as a landscape zone.
This is the DA, this is from the.
Original DA.
Yeah, it's just, it's what the landscape.
Existing landscape, there's no changes.
Yeah. I found online the original approved application, or the application as shown on the DA tracker anyway.
Yep.
And it shows it as landscape, existing landscape, no change. I don't know if you can see that, where the green strip along there.
That's this area.
I mean, I guess we'll clarify that with the staff, but that was just if it was approved as a landscape buffer, what's the justification? That's my question.
I think what you're saying is also approved as a landscape buffer
Other than the park and then a setback off Old Wingellow Road, but not that whole green area.
which you've maintained in this current development.
Yes, yes.
It's a sensitivity issue, but looking at the DA that's before us, and particularly in the southwest sector, I can't sense, well, sorry, I'll turn it around the other way. Was there an attempt to retain any of the key vegetation in that zone, or is most of it disappear?
In that area?
Yeah,
Is
that
that
area. That's that area. Yeah, that in my comments I mentioned an early discussion with councillor who had raised concerns about the retention of 2 particular trees in the pretty centrally located within that precinct. And we met on site, or then didn't meet council on site. We met on site, realigned some of the driveways and dwellings to protect those 2 trees particularly, had an updated arborist report around that, and resubmitted those amended plans. There's some trees along the, I think would be the western boundary, I think, of the adjoining western boundary, where I think the council has raised some concerns. Certainly my understanding based on our arborist report is that we will be fine. I mean, we're not removing all of those trees. The rest of that portion, like most of the original portion of the site, was cleared.
Was there a beta offset arrangement under the 2016
No.
legislation or not?
No, not that I'm aware of, no.
It's not required or was not provided?
Not required. As far as I know, for this DA, the
For this
council,
DA, there'll be lots of vegetation.
council raised specific issues of concern around some vegetation removal, specifically the 2 trees that are more centrally located there, which we amended the plans in order to protect. We haven't amended the plans further in relation to any
No,
sort
I'm
of trees
talking
along the
about
western
southwest
boundary.
sector only. The southwest sector only.
Only?
Yeah. Was there any attempt there to retain the vegetation? I understand the centre that you've talked about.
Well, I suppose the
Talking
short
about
answer is
the
no.
southwest
No, we have not amended the plans to do that, no.
So, Mr. Leach, can I just follow up with that? I'm just looking at This plan, and look, my eyesight's not great, but this plan seems to be dated 30 July 2021. Is that the latest landscape design for this site? Is that about right?
Well, if that's the plans that you've been presented with, yes, I imagine they're the latest
So
ones.
That's the plan. The trees in the centre of the site seem to be in the middle of this driveway. And certainly when we're out on site looking at this
So
plan,
just
that's,
getting my orientations to make sure I'm looking at the right thing there.
and there's a yellow.
That-
there's a
that
yellow
doesn't- no,
line,
that
there's a
doesn't
yellow
look like
line
the
around
right
it
one,
that seems
does
to
it?
show it.
No, that doesn't look like the right one then.
Do you want to approach?
Yeah, sure.
You want to approach? This is the south left section, so you come in here, and they look like they're the two trees there in the middle of that road.
That's correct, yeah, that's right, yeah.
So they're the two trees you said, I thought you said were going to be retained.
Yes, but then this is not, because that's what we really, just make sure. That's,
That's the site, that's the Jello Road. You come up the driveway here, and you come into the site here. Yeah, and there's the two trees in the centre of the site. And actually saying.
That helps. That helps.
yeah, those there. Yeah, they're the ones that I was referring to.
Well, they look like they're going to go in that.
But
plan,
they're
don't
not,
they?
they're not there.
I would agree with that, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not going to disagree
Yeah.
with that, but.
That's, and you can see my confusion.
Yes, yes.
So is this the right plan? This is dated, this is the one that the council officers have given to
What
us.
date
and
is
it's-
that, sorry?
It's dated, well, you can see there, it's dated 30 July 2021. Stage 2, DA
See,
commission
that's over a
stage.
year ago. No, that's not correct.
That's not the correct plan.
That plan is not, I suppose, the plan that gave council the concern, particularly around those trees, which is why we revised the layout there to.
So there's a
to
revised
take-
plan on that.
To take account of those.
Right.
So
Well, that's,
So my position would be that we have amended the plans to protect those.
protect those trees.
Okay.
In relation to your other questions, no, we haven't.
So, right out, so have a seat. So my next question, have you got any other questions, sorry?
no, that's fine.
Rightio. I've got a few questions. So there's, arborist report deals with trees on the adjoining side, on the western side of that pocket you were just looking at.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, are any of them going to be impacted by this development? Because I understand from the arborist report, one of them will be impacted by the development.
Yeah, I believe that's correct, yes.
Does that would require that owner's consent?
Yes, it would.
Have you got that owner's consent?
I don't believe we have that as yet.
That's an issue to this consent, obviously. Okay, so that's one issue. Bear with me. The presentation of the development to Old Jello Road, I'm really struggling to find how that will actually present. I'm actually trying to look at the designs. It looks like I'm looking at a fence along Old Jello Road and the dwellings that are going to be constructed along there aren't going to be addressing Old Jello Road.
I'm not too sure that's correct,
The access to those dwellings will be off the internal
Internal road,
roads, yes. So you'll have your garage at
Yeah.
the rear of the houses that are addressing. So
Yeah.
those four that are inside that rectangular area will have their garages off the internal road.
Yeah, okay. So I was looking at so that's, you know, goes to that, that streetscape issue in that the current one where you've got the open space along there, and I take your points about that, I think we've addressed that in enough detail today. But the dwellings, will be a fence, and there'll be a landscape strip between the fence and the road verge. Set that landscape strip, that's what's.
Yes, and that also contains drainage, like fire retention areas, so they'll be planted out with, you know, as rain gardens and landscape, but they're walled basins in part of that area. Yep.
Still outside
Yeah,
of that,
right.
so they're being constructed there.
Yeah.
So, but they don't extend right along the frontage of that
No.
setback.
No,
Okay. In terms of the DCP and the assessment report, Mr. Lee, there's some comments in
Yeah, we have a copy, yeah.
Like as we've already established,
Thanks.
the housing test doesn't apply to the others like apply to the savings grants transition from central service out. So
Mhm.
all the seniors housing in R2 zone. So we get to the DCP, which deals with it. The council assessment report then goes through various sections there. The DCP says it's not compliant, so that's the main issue. Have you got anything you would like to actually respond to those issues of non-compliance in relation to the general objectives about tree retention, tree cover, character, size of bedrooms, provision of access for services and facilities, etc. Have you got any sort of response to those issues? Because they then become, if that's the
Yes.
framework of
Yeah.
assessing under, they're the reasons under which
Well, some of those obviously should not have changed in relation to, accessibility to services, and that's the same. It's the same site, so I would sort of have to question, those issues or negative outcome of those issues. I don't see how that's possible. We haven't had really the chance to talk to the council officers about some of these other non-compliant issues, some of which might be design related, architectural, that could be readily fixed with some modification to internal layouts or things like that, but haven't had the chance to do that. So that's the first thing I'd say. Put them into those two different buckets. Are we talking about threshold questions of site suitability and compliance? Well, I don't think that should be argued. Are we talking about some detail of design and internal layouts to make of accessibility or compliance with certain requirements? I would feel confident all of those things could be remedied if the council had requested us to address those.
Is the design consistent with the existing?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, they are. It's the same. What I said in my opening remarks, the end product is something that is completely consistent in its character with what has been approved, and so the architect has. It's the same architect, the same template, if you like, in terms of providing internal amenity and compliance with different requirements. So there's no difference with any of that. It was approved because it was compliant and reasonable and suitable outcomes. So a lot of these non-compliance with the DCP controls are a little bit surprising because they're not issues that have been raised with us up until now, until the report. And if they were, we could have addressed them, is what my position would be. If that is something that's in the mind of the panel, well, then we'd welcome the opportunity to go back and fix those issues. But there's no point in that if we can't get agreement or support on the threshold question.
Okay, Mr. Anderson, question to you. You've obviously started marketing those, the stage one.
Well, I'm the civil engineer, I'm not, not the developer, no.
Are you guys at all familiar with the marketing and how they're going with marketing and demand for the stage one units?
No.
No, not really. No, other than to say that reiterate my points earlier, is that there is clearly a need for housing diversity across the Shire, including within Bundanoon. And council, I think, in our initial discussions, were fully supportive of that. And we maintain, well, I would hazard a guess to say that marketing, once it commences in full swing, will be well received because there is a strong demand.
Yes, I'd just like to clarify the bus access issue. I think it was acknowledged that there was an error in the report in terms of a misunderstanding with the timetable. What buses are accessible to the site? If you wanted to go to Moss Vale, because there's not like a full-line supermarket, for example, in Bundanoon, is my understanding. So what buses go to the site and where is the bus stop?
Yeah, well, I think it is mentioned in the report. I think it's Route 308, which I think, like I said before, is like an inter-town route that goes through Bundanoon and does a bit of a loop through Bundanoon, then onto Mossvale, then comes back around the other way. So you would pick it up from here, you'd get picked up and get dropped off at the corner of Hill and Old Wingelow Road, or on Old Wingelow Road, in fact, 'cause I think it comes, what's that, west?
So is it an actual
along-
bus stop, or is
No,
it?
my understanding is, yes, that is the designated bus stop, but like most of the buses that run through the Shire, the drivers hail and ride. You can hail and ride, but my understanding is that is one of the designated bus stops for that route, and it would then travel up Hill Street and it goes through Bundanoon and then to Mossvale. So those wanting the higher level services can do that on a regular basis. I don't believe, like most services in the Shire, weekends is not the go. But to expect that would be nice, but it just doesn't happen in the Shire at the moment. But certainly weekdays, you can pick that bus up, and then you can pick it back up in Mossvale to get home. And that bus stop is only 180 metres or something from the site.
Right,
So-
and and this is maybe a civil engineering question, in stage one, was there a footpath along Old Wingelow Road approved and
Yes.
it's going to be
It was
built?
conditioned by council to run to Hill Street with
Right.
pram ramps across Hill Street.
Okay, you said that before. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. Thanks.
Just one of the
That's part of the reason the trees had to be removed, because of this footpath being put in.
One other question, is there a relationship between this site and the nursing home?
No longer, unfortunately, I think. I mean, like one of those questions before about linkages. It was all Warrigal, and they obtained the consent to subdivide it, and then sold it.
I know it's got a minibus.
There's still a
Yeah.
right of access
Yeah.
through the site to Old Wingelow Road for Warrigal.
For Warrigal,
Along,
yeah.
along the road out of the site. So there's still a link there that, well, they can walk or drive through that point, yep.
There's a, like what I was saying, is that they've got a community bus there in the nursing home.
I believe so, yeah. Oh, look, there's nothing stopping. There's nothing.
Back into it otherwise.
there's nothing stopping, the future strata organisation or corporate body corporate, organising things like that, or work in partnership with Warrigal. I mean, the graduation of housing, you got care, you've got independent, and then you've got the rest of the village. It's hard to imagine a better location for some independent seniors living in Bundanoon than this site. And then the aged care is there, well established in the community. Some more formality around sharing of services, that would be lovely.
I think it's fair to say that the lack of a social impact assessment for this application and operation management plan, those sorts of things, raises a few questions. Well, I would answer, I guess, some of those issues relating to providing services.
Yes.
Which themselves act as a sense of a community, within this retirement village, how they will function. So,
Yep, I don't disagree.
Sorry, I've just got one more
One
thing.
more question.
Sorry. When the stage one was approved, was this land part of the site for the stage one?
It was.
So it would have been,
The subdivision was approved by council and was in the process of being signed off and registered when this DA was approved.
so it was
That
originally,
was the reason for the deferred commencement condition.
so there was when the officer or the council considered the first DA, or when that was notified, did it look like, oh, there's this extra bit of land and there'll be some future development coming later, or not? Or did it just look like this is a development will be contained to this site, and there's just this extra land, who knows what's going to happen with that down the track?
It's the same lot.
Same lot.
Oh, it's the same lot?
Yeah.
So what's the subdivision that you're speaking of then?
The Warrigal nursing
Oh,
home.
the
Excising
Warrigal
it
was
off
to be on the
Warrigal.
same lot as well?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, got it.
And that hadn't
Okay.
been registered just yet,
Right,
but it is now.
okay, thank you.
Now it's got another, we've got
Just-
endless questions.
in a lot of planning for these sort of functions and for these sort of activities, it's not uncommon to have some communal facility as a central space with central benefits like swimming pool and other elements, and certainly looked at a number of those sorts of developments. I can't discern from any of the plans, including stage 1 and now stage 2, that there's any real central communal facility provision other than the open space that we talk about, centred on the tree that faces toward Old Jello Road. Is that how it's understood? There's no central provision, no communal facility, no centre point?
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah.
My final question is, when was the amended plans lodged with council?
That we just talked about.
Yeah.
Yeah. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure we had a online meeting, a Zoom meeting with myself and Arborist officers, the director at the time. That may have been around February, March, I think. And then shortly thereafter, there was some amended plans submitted with some additional information from the arborist at that time. So some time ago, and then, you know, obviously council's been doing what it needs to do in the last few months.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Mr. Lee, you can stay there. We'll get to the next matter.
Good, thanks, mate.
Which is the subdivision of land to go 3 lots at Lisbon Road, Mossborough.
Thank you. With your indulgence, may I ask Mr. Paul Brandon, I did register Paul, maybe I've made a mistake there. Oh, okay. Yeah. Paul is from Australian Survey Solutions and has done all the survey work and drawn the plans for this subdivision. So again, he might be able to answer any questions you may have that may arise. No, thank you. Okay, yeah. All right, thank you very much. Again, I'm speaking on behalf of the applicants and landowners and against the staff recommendation for refusal. Just it's life it's in the big city, well, the way it goes. I've been involved in preparing the statement and the clause 4.6 variation request. Both of those documents acknowledge the minor variation to the lot size and made the case as to why strict adherence to that particular development standard was not necessary to achieve a suitable outcome and why it would be unreasonable to impose it in this case. The recommendation for refusal is based, in my opinion, on an unwillingness to support the minor variation to one of the 3 lots and a claim that in some way the available width of the lots is then not sufficient to accommodate suitable residential development. I'm a little concerned that these arguments have been conflated because the report does go on to say that a 2-lot subdivision would be supported. That wouldn't change the lot width. In fact, and the fact that one of those lots would be burdened by the access driveway, that seems a contradictory position. I also note that there's nowhere in Council's suite of planning controls where they seek to impose minimum lot width. In my opinion, I believe what's missing in Council's assessment in this case is recognition of the strategic outcomes. At a strategic level, this proposal is completely aligned with the delivering on Council's adopted housing strategy, which is to provide reasonable infill residential opportunities that in turn feed housing supply and assist with housing affordability. These are real issues, and it's incumbent upon Council's DA assessment decisions to take these important strategic outcomes into consideration. This is a locality with obvious latent potential, and this DA does nothing more than work with the inherited subdivision pattern to provide the most efficient and suitable outcome. I don't see consideration of those strategic issues being given sufficient weight in the assessment report. In any event, the officer's conclusion that the lots are not suitable to accommodate reasonable residential development is not supported by any thorough analysis and certainly not supported by facts on the ground around when you look around the Shire. All across the Shire there are examples, both old and new residential areas, of lots as narrow as 10 metres in building width providing suitable residential outcomes. These lots are 20 metres, or this lot's 20 metres wide, resulting in a clear 14 metres width for dwellings outside of the 6 metres that Council requires for access. It's simply not true to say that this lot width is insufficient. On the question of lot size and development density, the DA, as I said, is working with the inherited subdivision pattern that provides existing lots of 2,023 square metres, being roughly 20 metres by 100 metres. Unfortunately, that's not the nice round figure of 2,100, but would give you 3 times 700 lots. It would be if it was just 5 metres deeper, and if you distributed that 5 metres over each lot, it's 1.7 metres per lot, you'd have a compliance, but it'd be indiscernible from the lots that we're proposing. Having said that, of course, I'd also say there's no magic in the figure of 700 square metres anyway. The fact that one lot's slightly less has no impact upon the lot layout or their capacity to accommodate residential development, any more than if one of the lots was slightly more than 700, not slightly less. Interestingly, I note the report does agree that 3 lots and dwellings is possible. Firstly, it's a subdivision of 2, 700, plus the residue of 1,300, with a subsequent dual lock on the larger lot that would then also be subdivided into 2 660s. That's in your business papers today, those provisions. Council supports them. Of course, I have to acknowledge we haven't lodged a DA for dual occupancy. But it is pertinent to note this, if for no other reason than to demonstrate that allowing the 3rd lot in this subdivision, albeit with the minor variation, is not pushing development density into uncharted territory. Also of relevance is the site locality that offers a lower price entry point into the Southern Highlands, which is no doubt is becoming more and more expensive and out of reach to more and more of the community. Development upon these lots in this area will be modest in scale, approximating 200, 220 square metres of floor area that's easily accommodated on these lots. Our request at the panel is to reach a positive conclusion for the DA, which I believe is where you end up if you look at both the strategic merit of the proposal and the capacity of the site to accommodate 3 lots. The submitted variation, clause 4.6 variation, request for lot size for 1 lot effectively made the case based upon strategic and site-specific considerations. The outcome here is positive in social and economic terms. The locality is in transition and is a locality that can play a significant role in council achieving its important strategic objectives for housing. 30 seconds. Thank you. Planning is not one-dimensional and certainly should not only be concerned with mathematical compliance with arbitrary controls. I'm not convinced that it's right to condemn this DA because 700 square metres is okay, but 623 square metres is not, when the real issue is the provision of housing opportunity. In the absence of any adverse environmental impacts that would arise, and the alternative pathways that are clearly available that could lead to 3 or even 4 dwellings, this minor variation to the lot size of 1 lot should be supported and the subdivision approved. In my opinion, that's the most appropriate planning outcome. Happy to take some questions.
When it comes to a DA, I don't necessarily agree that strategic outcome is what's got to be considered. Clause 4.6 is a very technical requirement, and there's been like gazillion court cases and appeals and things like that, and judgments from the court that set out very clearly what's required.
Yep.
And the first part of your clause 4.6 statement does address the details about compliance with the objectives and so on, but the last part of it seems very light on, in my view, with the environmental planning grounds. Strategic direction to allow more housing in the Shire, to my mind, is not an environmental planning ground for this site. What are your environmental planning grounds?
We can achieve all the objectives of the zoning and the development standard with the subdivision that's been proposed. This 700 square metres is the development standard, but one of the lots does not meet it, whereas 2 do. But the result of that is inconsequential in terms of the final development outcomes.
Yeah, no, my understanding of clause 4.6 for environmental planning grounds, the first stuff, the thing you just mentioned just then is to do with we'd meet the zone objectives no matter that we don't meet the number. But the second part of clause 4.6 is environmental planning grounds. What is so special about this lot that means that the minimum lot size standard should be not upheld?
Oh, well, I believe, maybe contrary to your position, that those strategic planning objectives of council should be and must be taken into consideration when council is making these sorts of decisions. The council's broad objectives here for housing are set out in their housing strategy. They want and need infill residential development. This delivers on that. The 700 square metre minimum lot size is the standard that council has imposed across broad areas of the Shire, including this area. There hasn't been an assessment by the council or anyone else about the underlying or the prevailing subdivision patterns that exist. And it just happens that broad areas of Mossvale have land of 2,023 square metres. Council then sticking rigidly to a arbitrary figure of 700 says, well, you can't ever get 3 because you need 2,100 and you've only got 20 and 23,000. It's not planning, it's just mathematics. It's more that the planning decisions need to be more than that. That's an environmental planning ground, looking behind the standard or past the standard to understanding why it's there in the first place. Well, it's arbitrary, and the council uses 700 across broader areas of the Shire that have no relationship to each other, but they have the same planning control. You know, you could question that. So there's no science behind that. They use other standards as well in various other areas, but all of that is working towards an outcome, which in this case is a residential development outcome. And all I'm saying is that our proposition supports the big picture. The small picture is the maths. And then when you turn your mind to the impacts of that, there aren't any. And when you can't point to adverse impacts, you must surely question the need to stick rigidly to the standard. That's what clause 4.6 is about. That's what SEP 1, when it used to be called SEP 1, was about. It was SEP 1 because everybody recognised the need for variation and flexibility in the system. It wasn't SEP 1 by accident. It was the first thing that was needed in the planning system, a mechanism for variation and flexibility. It's still there. It has a different name, and it's got some different structure to what it is you're supposed to point out to, or address. But I think I've done that pretty well in that submission. What I don't see in the council assessment report is a rebuttal of my reasons. I just see, no, it doesn't add up. That to me isn't good enough. If it doesn't add up and you get adverse outcomes, and those outcomes are contrary to our strategic position, then I wouldn't be here. But I'm here because I think that's the wrong decision. I think the best planning decision is a combination of all of those things, and when you put all of those things into it, I can't see that this is a bad DA.
I'm glad you brought up the issue of SEP 1. One of my favourite tests is the unusual and unique circumstances. What are the unusual and unique circumstances in this case?
Well, that's going to be hard to say. That's unique, isn't it? Because I've just said that there are examples like this across broad areas of Mossvale. So I'm not too sure that there are unique circumstances here. So I probably won't even try to pretend there are.
Because I guess what the courts said is that if you vary a standard and it's going to lead, it doesn't matter how, like this is over 10%, right? You know, 7 square metres over 10%, it's over 10%,
Yeah.
right? And if you start making variations to development standards that in certain situations that aren't unusual and unique, which could lead to a broad abandoning of that development standard, you should go through proper planning processes. You go through a planning proposal process. Now, you make a lot of good points too, Mr. Lee, I think there. But in the council officers report, they've provided a figure on page 120, which I think is a really good figure. It's of other subdivision applications that have been approved in that general precinct.
Yep.
And it shows them all, they've all complied, and it shows where this infill subdivision can occur. And this situation here on your side, where you're doing basically a three lot straight down, that, would you not agree, that's my question, would you not agree that could happen? All those lots in Lighton Avenue, and what would be the outcome of
Yeah.
that? Is that going to lead to a negative planning outcome, or should we be going down, instead of planning proposal, to re-examine, say, go to a 550 square metre lot size in the area instead of a 700 square metre lot size? If it's a half acre, if they, you know, they were created, the lots were created back in 1977.
Yeah.
The DP, that's when it was registered, the council staff showed us that today, so it would be better to maybe go through a planning proposal stage instead of setting a precedent here for expanding that standard right across the whole area.
I don't think it'd be preferable for an individual to go through that planning proposal process, but if the council wanted to take that on as part of their housing strategy, I would very much welcome that. I can't, like I said before, I can't say black is white. The site is not unique in that sense, and that diagram is useful. Yeah, and fair enough too. The second part of your question as to what that would lead to, adverse impacts or adverse outcomes, no, it's not going to do that. I fully appreciate what you're saying about undermining or whatever the standard as it is now, as it is today. But if that was to happen in this particular set of circumstances, that would not be an adverse outcome. All it would be additional housing where it's needed, at a price point where it's needed, and that's supporting council's housing strategy. So that's the conundrum. Thank you for pointing that out, but I'm not going to argue black is white.
And I guess, look, and the point about the housing strategy, there needing to be more housing, not just in this shire, but across the state. There's a need to do that. And in these sort of situations, this isn't necessarily unique to this locality. This occurs in a lot of places. There are other mechanisms where you can do this infill, and that's what the report is saying. You can do a two-lot subdivision and do an integrated housing development with dual occupancy at the back, and that in potential can lead to a better design control of what's on there, especially on smaller, thinner, narrow lots where you've got an existing house at the front. I guess that can lead to a better design outcome, and that's I think what the council staff support is trying to say.
Look, thanks very much. Thank you very much to the panel for the opportunity to speak today. I suppose what we're all looking for here today is for making decisions to support council's strategy. What we're looking at here is an area of historical lots that was initially subdivided back in 1891. The shapes of these lots are what is a legacy of what we need to deal with today. Council at the moment have zoned this area as 700 square metre lots. Scott's spoken about the housing strategy and the need for an entry into the property market, and here supplies that objective. These lots were designed at half-acre lots, which is 2023 square metres, and that pretty much all of the lots in Lytton Road and Parks Road behind it are identical. If we're looking for 700 square metre lots in this area, and we've all got 2,000 square metre lots, I think your point is quite valid. Are we going to end up with a similar scenario up and down the street? And potentially we are. But if we're zoned at 700 square metres, or why was it zoned at 700 square metres? If we didn't support that type of development in the first place, why was it zoned 700 square metres? Council had the opportunity to have a different outcome at an earlier point in time if they so chose. But they elected to have 700 square metres in an area, knowing the lot size that's been there for 130 years, those lots haven't changed in that time frame. If council wanted a different outcome to what we've proposed here, there was the opportunity prior in the planning mechanisms to prohibit such applications. I think, as Scott's highlighted, we're trying to say up front now what we're looking to achieve. Yes, you're right, we could subdivide off one lot now, have a residue lot and come back and do a dual lock at a later stage. But we're trying to say up front, this is what we're looking to achieve now. Those better planning outcomes that you spoke of in terms of design, can they be achieved by a dual lock at a later stage? Yes, they can, but we're trying to address that now. So we've just got one single application. We're not duplicating the workload of council. We're being clear and transparent as to what we're looking to achieve. I think the minor variation in lot size is really just an anomaly, and it's a historical legacy of those original lot sizes. If council doesn't want to support the application as it is, you're right that we can come back at a later stage and go down the dual lock path and still tick all the boxes of council. The same outcome is going to be achieved regardless. So that's why we're questioning the recommendation for refusal, and we thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you. Okay.